podcast you're about to hear is true. The names have not been changed to protect the innocent, the guilty, or anyone else. If you're interested in the same type of discussion related to organized crime that you hear in the traditional media, stop listening now. If you're interested in thinking differently or learning something, turn up the volume on your computer, smartphone, or mobile device. This is The Racket Report. Here's Frank Morano.
Welcome to The Racket Report. I'm Frank Morano. This is the podcast that takes you inside the world of organized crime. If there's one criticism that I've dealt with since we've been doing this podcast, and by the way, I want to make clear, the overwhelming amount of correspondence I've gotten since we've been doing this podcast has been incredibly positive. People saying we're telling the stories that no one has heard before, giving people an inside look at what's going on inside the mob and inside La Cosa Nostra. But if there's one criticism, it's been that we've had too many gangsters on, and they tend to sound like they're glamorizing and glorifying gangster life. Well, you're about to meet a guy who is a star law enforcement officer, a retired law enforcement officer who actually put his own life on the line to infiltrate one of the most notorious mafia families in the country. The mob family that a lot of people say is the basis for the TV show The Sopranos. Very pleased to welcome to the program not only a retired law enforcement officer, a guy who is a motivational speaker for first responders and for corporations, a first responder support specialist, the author of the book Giovanni's Ring, My Life Inside the Real Sopranos, the one and only Giovanni Rocco. Giovanni, thanks so much for joining me on The Racket Report.
Hey, Frank, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Give us a little background about your career in law enforcement. When did you join the FBI? How old were you?
I wasn't an FBI agent. I started out my law enforcement career as a third-generation cop in New Jersey, and then I was task forced out for most of my career. I was 26 years in law enforcement, and I probably did on and off maybe 24 of those years on task forces with DEA and FBI. Ultimately, I landed on the FBI task force.
So tell folks how that works, how you can be part of an FBI or DEA task force, even though you're part of a local law enforcement agency. For people that aren't in law enforcement, explain to folks how that works.
Yeah, sure. It's a shared interest between local, state, and county law enforcement, along with the government agencies at a federal level. And they put task forces together because it's a joint effort. It's, with all the organized crime that's going on now, street gangs, organized crime, traditional organized crime, Eurasian organized crime, it's just more effective to use the locals as well. So the federal agencies will lean on them, and they'll be sworn in. You become a task force agent, which is you're a sworn U.S. Marshal, and then you work as if you were an agent on the task forces.
And were you always undercover, or did you originally have a law enforcement career that was a bit more conventional?
I did. I had a conventional. I started as a cop walking the beat in a city in New Jersey and just outside by Hudson County. And like I said, third generation, I made my way into a gold shield very quickly. I was an aggressive cop, so I was given a gold shield and placed into vice and organized crime and then narcotics. And then from there, that's when my springboard into undercover work started very, very early on. I'd say probably 1991, 92 is when I did my first undercover. And then my talents were recognized by different agencies, and then I was used all over the place.
How do you prepare to infiltrate the mob? What kind of training do you get? What kind of studying do you do? What kind of prep work do you do? Because obviously, in addition to knowing who's who and knowing what kind of crimes you're going to be investigating, I would think you have to almost train like an actor would train as you step into a role. Take us through your preparation process, how you first get started with something like that.
Yeah, that's a great question, Frank. Unfortunately for me, I started out what I learned in the streets of New Jersey. So I had no formal training early on in my career. So a lot of it was life and death situations and a lot of bad mistakes I made along the way. So by the time I was working in the DEA, I had a little bit of basic training as far as money counterfeiting, money laundering went and stuff like that to be able to speak and take those roles on. But then as the FBI came calling and I had to go to their specialized training, that's when I guess I went from the minors to the major leagues at that point, because the amount of human behavior you have to understand and study is tremendous. You have to learn so much about your own human behavior and others and communication. But then I never realized as a cop here I'd be working foreign counterintelligence cases, which is actually spy work. So that's the level of training that they gave you. So you really did have to know how to get yourself out of situations. You couldn't always blow the whistle and call time out. Of course, we're not actors. We can't just yell cut. But there are some harrowing situations you're placed in, and you really need to talk your way out of it. But you have to do it with such emotional intelligence, and that's what they provided to us.
Tell me about your first experience working undercover. You indicated that was 1991, 1992. What was your first experience working undercover?
Sure. My first one was with an outlaw bike organization based out of the New York Northeast area.
Repeat that for me. It was with
OMG's okay. Outlaw Motorcycle Group.
Gotcha.
And so one of the sister clubs, or a support club, as you would call it, I came in at that level buying some low-level dope, maybe a few pounds of marijuana here and there. And the ultimate goal was to get in and be buying powder off of them, whether that be crystal meth or cocaine. And I was placed into that, again, with no formal training. And the first night I had gone in, I totally screwed that up horrifically. And I was given the chance to go back and kind of clean up my work. Because, again, I applied what I knew in the street. So I was very aggressive. I didn't have that emotional intelligence at the time. So they gave me the opportunity to go back in and clean it up. And then I did. And, when I go back in there with clear thoughts, and I was able to succeed at that case. And that was probably about 3 months, which is unheard of in those days. You really didn't do long-term undercovers. They weren't considered. 3 to 6 months was a long-term operation back then. So that was my first.
Maybe this is too silly a question, or a question that only people that don't know anything about this stuff would ask, but I'll go ahead and ask it anyway. You mentioned having some experience growing up in New Jersey on the streets. I would think that there's at least a chance that you would encounter as a cop a friend of a friend of an acquaintance of an acquaintance of somebody that you knew growing up. What do you do if you get recognized while you're undercover? And were you ever close to that, whether it was with the motorcycle gang or the DeCavalcanti family? Did you ever have a close call where you got recognized by someone in a circumstance where you didn't want to be recognized?
Oh, sure. I've had that happen to me a bunch of times. I do write about some of the when I was under with the DeCavalcantes, it happened to me a few times. One time at my daughter's soccer game, which I talk about, one of the members from a different organization, a different Borgata, crime family as we call it, I had a Gambino guy walk up on me when I was off, and I was on the weekend. I was at a soccer tournament, and I write about that, and I mitigated it. Again, having that training and having that ability to really work through a situation that you're under this pressure, that's what you have to operate under at all times. You never know when you have to turn it on. Other times it was an equipment failure. One time in the early 90s when we used to wear transmitting wires, when the wire fell off of my shirt, it was taped to my chest and fell out in the middle of the deal with a gun deal and a drug deal. And here the white wire, of course it's a white wire, and it's hanging down my leg. And, you just have to kind of blade your body, mitigate it so they don't see it, and hope that they didn't see it. And you move on. Other times I had been in situations where, particularly in the DeCavalcante case, again, I'm born and raised in Bayonne, New Jersey, and it's a stone's throw from where the DeCavalcante's headquarters is in New Jersey, which is Elizabeth, New Jersey. So it's only 1 or 2 exits away on the Jersey Turnpike. So you can only imagine one day when I had gotten in a car to do a dope deal, and the guy didn't have my dope, so we had to take a ride. And, of course, as Murphy's Law has it, he wanted to drive to Bayonne to get it. So that was a harrowing situation because, again, growing up in Bayonne, it's a very small town. It's very Brooklyn-esque. And now I'm going someplace where, Italian bakeries that I grew up in, and I used to go, I had to walk past them, and God forbid somebody saw it. But thank God, I got through it. And I kind of stayed in the car for most of the time and just made the guy go into the establishment, get it for me, and bring it out. Again, you always have to, your head has to be on a swivel at all times.
Oh, I can imagine. So talk to me about your work with the DeCavalcanti family. How did you come to infiltrate the DeCavalcanti family? What was going on with respect to the DeCavalcanti family at the time? And how did they view you in your undercover persona?
Sure. As an undercover at that point, I was working multiple cases for the Bureau. At that point in my career, I think I had 4 different identities: Social Security numbers, dates of birth, backstopped identifications. And the one in particular was just a street guy. Giovanni Rocco was his name. And That's the persona I had taken on for a lot of when I was doing bona fides, when I would show up. If you had a deal going, which in this situation, a colleague of mine, another undercover, was doing a dope deal down in Atlantic City. And I was just there strictly for bona fides. I showed up in case, and the guys that we were dealing with, they were low-hanging fruit within the D Cavalcantes. And they went back after they met us and they painted a picture without us even mentioning that we were connected to organized crime. They went back and made this whole story up in the neighborhood that they met some Bruno Scarfo guys from Atlantic City and all this yada yada. They came back with this crazy cockamamie story, but that piqued some people's interest. And before you know it, they wanted to meet me. And this wasn't a planned case. That the FBI and the federal government didn't mean to target the top echelon of the D Cavalcantes. It just kind of unraveled that way. My persona, the way I carried myself, they just took an interest in me. I took an interest in them. And before you know it, Charlie Stango was being released from prison. He was a soldier at the time, and he had gotten promoted to be a captain or a capo regime in the family. And he was a murder and mayhem kind of guy. And he latched on to me, and the case just took a life of its own for the next 3 years.
I introduced the D Cavalcante family as what some people claim is the basis for the Soprano crime family in New Jersey, and the title of your book is My Life Inside the Real Sopranos. Is that true? Are the D Cavalcantes really the basis for the Sopranos?
Well, I can tell you from my experiences and what I've learned over my career, long before I did the D Cavalcante case, I worked so many other organized crime cases in my career, both as an undercover, as an investigator. But yeah, I mean, they are very close similarities. And just to give you some ideas how the neighborhood and everything you see portrayed on the screen on The Sopranos was very much what I had witnessed and experienced in my life in the crime family. The Sopranos used to report to John Sacramone and the New York faction of another family in New York, very much so to D Cavalcantes. When I was infiltrating, I was told, and I made tapes just indicating that they reported to the Gambino crime family. And just the amount of intelligence that we gleaned from my case was tremendous, because it just showed how the families worked together. And I think that was never done before. It was just very cut and dry, the cases that were done before. Undercovers were sent in to show, okay, this faction, this crew, this family are committing these crimes. But what we had done in Operation Charlie Horse with the decavs is show the intel on how the families actually share responsibility, share companies, share the piece of the pie, as you would have it, from different crimes we committed. So even so much so as the day I went on record with the bosses, I was brought to what they call a cattle dealer. It's a little deli, a pork store, if you will, in Elizabeth, New Jersey, which very much replicated the pork store in The Sopranos, Cetrials. So that's where I went on record. And that day, I'll never forget that day, because it was very, very reminiscent of watching an episode on Sopranos. As you came around the corner, all the guys were sitting outside at the table, and I went inside, and it was just as if you walked onto a set of The Sopranos. That's where I met the bosses. So many similarities.
How did you, given your experience, I imagine that if someone is a professional meteorologist, for instance, they could point out all the inaccuracies in a film like Twister. When I watch a movie or a television show that deals with a radio station, I always point out, that's not how it is, that's not how it is, that's not real. Given your experience actually living with these guys and working with these guys and surveilling these guys, how did you enjoy The Sopranos? Are you ever able to take yourself out of it and just watch it as a regular viewer, or do you kind of find yourself internally fact-checking the realism of certain aspects of it?
I think it was well done, Frank. I think that and again, during my time infiltrating, that day I went on to meet the administration. I met the boss of bosses, and we met all these people. I went home that night to my undercover apartment, and that's the day that James Gandolfini had passed away. And at Sopranos, HBO was doing all the tributes to him on The Sopranos, and they were replaying all the episodes. So I had tried to decompress from the day that I just had going on record, staring at bloody butcher cloths and bloody aprons and bone saws and hacksaws and meat cleavers and all these things, and thinking, wow, I'm lucky to still be alive, and I'm lucky to have my head still attached to my body. I turned on the TV, and there's an episode of Sopranos that's airing. So it was very reminiscent of what I was experiencing. I would say that you never saw, of course, for TV and film purposes, it's always blood and murder and mayhem, but it wasn't like that every day. A lot of times it's just bowls of macaroni and a lot of BS conversation and kicking it around and chopping it up with each other. Other times when you think it's just going to be a bowl of macaroni, Next thing you know, they're talking about hijacking somebody and pistol whipping a security guard. Wow. So you never know. These guys are, that level that I was dealing with, the old time guys and the serious guys are very hardcore, and sometimes they're sociopathic.
Did those guys watch The Sopranos?
Yes, they did. We never brought it up, but on so many different occasions when I was an investigator and doing surveillance on different people, when The Sopranos was at its prime, I was working organized crime on a task force, and we would follow these guys. We'd follow made guys in these different families, these different borgatas, and we would follow them to the after parties or the rap parties for the Sopranos series. And then when I was doing, search warrants on their homes, whether it be for a racketeering, a RICO case, or a search warrant for anything, and you go through people's belongings in their house, you'd always come across pictures that they would actually have taken. And I can never understand why a made guy who's trying to avoid the limelight and is trying to live the life of Omerta, why would you go to a public party with all these fake actors and have your picture taken in front of the Sopranos sign, like behind your table? So very much so. They celebrated it. And if you do remember, you can Google some conversations that the decab guys had early on. And there was actually a Title III, a wiretap they had in the car where the two DeCavalcante made guys had a conversation, and the FBI was able to record it about how when The Sopranos came out, hey, did you watch that show last night on HBO?
Mm-hmm.
That's so-and-so, this is so-and-so, and this is me, and this is you. So they even acknowledged how close it was to the real life versus the film.
The other film that people, I think, probably think of when they think of your story is Donnie Brasco, which is the story of Joe Pistone and his efforts to infiltrate the Bonanno crime family. Obviously, I realize it's a different era, and it's New York rather than Jersey, and there's a lot of different circumstances. But when you watch a film like Donnie Brasco, are there aspects of that ring true to life for you?
I think so. I remember as a young investigator and a young cop, a young undercover, watching that movie and thinking, so many similarities of what you experienced, the mental anguish from being separated from your family at times. I think I related to that. Again, it was, I think that case took place in a much more violent time. The war was going on within the mafia families at that time. So I can imagine how hard it would have been on Joe Pistone to do that. But the mental anguish, I always took note of that, and I took note of him being away, living in an apartment by himself. And again, when you're at that level, so many different guys I've talked to. Jack Garcia, who infiltrated the Gambinos, he shared the same experiences. He had a very difficult time at times, trying to unplug, if you would. It's very difficult to unplug from you're playing this character, but you can quickly get swept up by it too, because you're living it 24/7, and then all of a sudden you got to, take a break and go home and be a husband. You might have to go home and be a father, go to parent-teacher night, go to a soccer game. And it's very hard to disconnect from that. So that's some takeaways that I took from watching that story about Joe Pistone.
You know what I wonder? Is there a difference in the type of person that becomes a gangster now in the year 2024 versus 30 years ago in the early 1990s? And the reason I ask is because when you talk to or read stories or hear interviews of people that were involved in the mafia in the 60s, the 70s, even the early 80s, you almost get the sense that these are very intellectual guys that are doing this for some sort of a noble purpose. Sure, they're stealing. Sure, they're killing people. Sure, they're extorting folks. Sure, they're breaking the law, but there was some sort of higher purpose. And then, because essentially membership in the mafia these days comes with an automatic RICO indictment and a lengthy mandatory minimum jail sentence, you almost come to think that the only people that would ever get involved in the mob these days are people with muscles between both ears. And perhaps that's my naivete. Perhaps it's romanticizing an era that never really was. But I'm just curious, as someone that's gotten to observe these guys, do you notice any sort of decline in either the intellect or the character of the kind of person that would join the mob today as opposed to decades ago?
I think, great question, Frank. I think the naivete is, it's not so much naivete, it's just being the understanding of it. the understanding, and you hit it right on the head when you said RICO. When they came up with the RICO statute, that was a game changer, right? Now I got to be careful of where I go and who I meet with. And that was very much so when I had my crew. I was running a crew for Charlie Stango at the end of my case. And I remember sitting down with my crew, and they explained on the tape, we got to be careful of RICO. So they're very much aware of these things. The sophisticated guys are. I'm not talking about your street level kids that are wannabes, but the sophisticated guys that have dedicated their life to this, to Cosa Nostra. A lot of times we find, and I think a lot of law enforcement would agree with me, that when we sit down and talk to them, we realize what an amazing brain they do have. It's not all muscle between their ears. These guys, they just chose a hard and fast life because hard and fast money was where it's at. They didn't have an education. Maybe they dropped out of school. And I was able to relate to that a little bit because I barely made it out of high school myself. So I was able to understand that life. And again, when you do, I'm not condoning it by any means, but when you don't have the ability to go to high school and you don't have the ability to get a really high-paying job, well, you resort to making fast money. So when you do start making fast money and you're not paying your taxes, that's when organized crime takes hold. And that's maybe somebody sees something in these guys and they tap them and they bring them in and they recruit them to be in their Borgata or their family. Other kids like today, I think to touch on it, I saw a lot of old school guys. See, when I was with the decabs, I dealt with a lot of older guys, the guys that were from that era, from the 70s, leftovers that were still out there. When I'm dealing with them, they're in their 70s, mid-70s, some of them, and they were still murder and mayhem guys. I mean, these guys, I made tapes against guys that say, listen, tell this guy when I see him, I'm going to hurt him. I'm going to hurt him. He's going to the hospital. And here's a little old man. He's on an oxygen tank. Right. I'm sitting in his home. And that's how dedicated and committed they were to the life, right? Omerta. That's not so much now with the young bucks. The young bucks are more social media driven. Even everything we see on these platforms now with the podcast, gangsters and former gangsters want to have this celebrity status. So there is no omerta anymore. There is no more committed to the life. It's about, individual successes and individual status. I think nobody's looking out for the families anymore the way they did at that era in the 70s and 80s.
As bad as a guy might be, as bad as the criminal as he might be, as bad as sociopathic as you described as someone might be, when you're spending time, sharing pasta or hanging around a pork store with someone and you're not talking about criminal activity, I have to think, as you're both talking about the Met game or your families or different recipes, that there's some aspect of kinship that develops, some aspect of camaraderie that develops between you and the people that you're investigating. And I understand, obviously, you have to maintain some sort of dissonance because your job is ultimately to build cases against these people and to arrest them. But did you find yourself getting charmed by any of these guys, by developing a fondness for any of these sociopathic criminals that you're trying to build cases against? And how does that work?
Yeah, that's a difficult road to go down. I mean, it's for me, I grew up in that violent environment. I was blessed to grow up in Bayonne, New Jersey, and Hudson County, and Jersey City, and Hoboken, and to have those connections to Cosa Nostra as it was. I grew up in I identified with a lot of what I witnessed when I was inside the mafia, a lot of the family aspect, a lot of the closeness and the love that they did show for me. And it was true love. I mean, we grew to be a family, and they took me in as sometimes as one of their own, and holidays would come, invite me over, celebrations, graduations, kids getting hurt, phone calls. I became Uncle G or Uncle Giovanni to some of the kids. Other people will call me Cousine. It's a very affectionate phrase to say, my cousin. And it's a term of endearment in that world. And I recognize that to be what I knew growing up in the street. So a lot of these guys, even Charlie, I describe it a lot of times when Charlie, just the color of his eyes were the same color of one of the most important people in my life growing up was my uncle. And they had the same color eyes. So just the way his mannerisms were. But they would always remind me because towards the end of the case, I was given the task to murder people and they wanted me to do it. So they always reminded me of who they truly were, not their family members, but again, they'd look out for me. When I flew out to Vegas and I was out there a lot with Charlie, he would say to me, take 2 extra bottles of water. It's hot. It's 100 and some odd degrees. Well, listen, I'm only going right back to the strip to my hotel. Take a couple of bottles. Don't worry about it. It's hot. He'd always look out for you. Call me when you land. It wasn't a criminal act like you do for your loved one. Call me when you get home. Call me when you get back to the East Coast. Just let me know you landed so I know you're okay. and that wasn't keeping tabs on me. That was true, genuine friendship and kinship like you described. But then there'd always be a thing that they said or did. And in the end, when it came out as Murder and Mayhem Guys, they'd say to me, just be the man you were born to be. And they reminded me I'm representing the family now. So no matter what I do, even if I make a mistake, referring to, even if I kill somebody in the street by accident, and he happens to be a made guy, don't worry about it. I'll make you right. For somebody to say that, and I understood what that meant. See, I speak, growing up in those neighborhoods, I could speak fluent Mafia because it was things that were said in front of me, around my father. He'd bring home through investigations. So I understood it in and out what these guys meant. So even if you're wrong, Giovanni, even if you're wrong, I'll make you right. Don't worry about it. I love you, kid. And that's things guys would say to me. So, that pulls on your heartstrings at times, but you have to have that fortitude, that mental fortitude, and that you have to maintain that composure, and you have to keep your persona as an undercover. So
why do people do this these days? Or really, I mean, from any time, I guess, but in your experience, why do people go down the life of joining La Cosa Nostra or becoming an associate of La Cosa Nostra? Is it purely greed? Is it wanting some sort of sense of belonging, or is it something else?
I agree with all the above, Frank. I think it's depending on the individual. I've seen it where they're brought into it and they're kind of baited into it, very much like human trafficking is today with young kids, right? You're lulled into this sense of you're one of us, you're one of our, you belong to us now, or we'll take care of you, and we extend our arm, we wrap our arms around you and protect you. Some people are looking for that. Some people are looking for family component, and they love that camaraderie and brotherhood they're looking for. Very much for like OMGs, like Outlaw Motorcycle Group, same thing. Whether they're looking for something to be part of, something to be meaningful. Other guys are just, not everybody in the Mafia is murder and mayhem kind of people. They're organized crime. They're organized people. They might have a business that's looking for support and they can't get loans at the bank, so they go to the street. Next thing you know, they belong to organized crime. It doesn't mean they're all murder and mayhem people. They're just stuck in their financial situations. Other people are just sociopaths. There are a very small percentage of them that are within the Mafia. That's still the guys that everybody fears, right? Like the crazy Joe Gallo kind of guy. Mm-hmm. If you're aficionado of the mob, those kind of people where they're just murder and mayhem guys, and that's what they just love the fact that they're feared, right? The old saying, "Would you rather be loved or feared?" Well, some guys rather be feared, not both. So that's how they operate.
Tell me about your podcast, Inside the Life. I know it's produced by the Mob Museum, and I've been to the Mob Museum. It's very impressive. They have a lot of very impressive people involved with it. What are you doing on this podcast?
Yeah, thanks for promoting it. I appreciate it. It's myself and my colleague who used to be on the cover with me. He was an outlaw motorcycle guy, and his name is Dutch. And now we have a show called Inside the Life with Giovanni and Dutch. And it's hosted by the podcast. The podcast is hosted by the Mob Museum, and it's hosted on site at the museum. And we kind of explore harrowing true stories of people that have lived the life that I'm describing to you in the world of organized crime. And we interviewed everybody from mob and TV film stars to undercover agents like myself. And then we have a handful of other people that maybe have come from the criminal element or come from the mob itself. And they tell their stories of redemption, regret, exactly what you and I are talking about, and describe what brought them into the life. So maybe if somebody is thinking about taking a wrong turn in life, then maybe they'll learn something. Because the museum does, they do a great job as the National Museum of Organized Crime and Law Enforcement. They do a great job of outreach and stuff like that. So this just adds to the platform.
After years of living undercover, how has that experience shaped your interactions in everyday life now? Do you ever find yourself still instinctively adopting certain undercover behaviors or mindsets?
Well, I guess those behaviors and mindsets are something I brought to my career in law enforcement growing up as a kid. So I guess sometimes I grew up in a very emotionally charged and sometimes violent environment, even in my personal life and my home life. So it wasn't just all job related, but it's some of what I took onto the job. And I think, at times it's very difficult reliving the events. It's difficult thinking about the sacrifices that I made, but also the unwitting sacrifices that my family made. My kids were young at the time of some of the cases I did, how many times I had my life threatened. It wasn't just the Italian Mafia case that ended my career. Before that, it was cartels that threatened me, political figures threatened me, police, law enforcement. I had threats against me from all different angles. So, I had been on a roller coaster ride, putting my family through some trying times and some difficult times when we always had to have these security details put on us. And then finally, the one that ended my career and in a sense also ended my wife's law enforcement career as well, and it forced us to relocate. So there was you're always putting your life back together. I didn't retire. I didn't have that traditional retirement. I didn't leave. A lot of friends I made along the way, I kind of disconnected from. And now that I'm resurfaced because of everything that's going on in the world of law enforcement today and the support, I felt the need to come out of the shadows. And that's what kind of was the springboard for me to write the book. It was therapeutic for me, but it was also therapeutic to be there and give me a platform to help these guys and girls that are suffering today. So I by helping others, you help yourself. That's the way I look at it. So hopefully.
Obviously, undercover work requires adopting a different persona. And how did you manage the internal conflict between Giovanni Rocco and Giovanni Gatto? Was there ever a moment where the line between the two identities blurred a bit?
Oh, there were plenty of times, Frank, that line blurred. Sure. When I was emotionally charged and I came home and I couldn't quite decompress and I wasn't ready to turn off yet, my wife would say to me, listen, you can't come home like this. You have to stay another day. You have to stay at one of your apartments or go back out to Vegas and don't come home. You can't come home like this. So what I had done, and that's the name of my book comes from this, is what I'll tell you now is Giovanni's ring comes from, I made a mental decision that the switch was my pinky ring. If you can imagine, every time I pulled into my driveway in my car and I made it home, well, some of the jewelry I wore was mine because I love jewelry. And, it's the tradition of my family giving me different, I didn't wear my own pinky ring. I wore a pinky ring that was issued by the government. And it was this gaudy, big diamond gold ring, and I would take it off in my car. And I never allowed that. It was a switch for me. But the minute I took it off, I was not Giovanni Gatto anymore. The minute I dropped it in a cup holder in my truck, I became Giovanni Rocco again. So I did that as a measure of, okay, I got to unplug from this and go back and I got to go be a dad and a husband now. So for a while, I thought I was mitigating that really well. And that's where I came up with of course, my crime ring that I was running also is the name of the book. But Giovanni's ring was that pinky ring. And, I thought I had a good balance at the time, but unbeknownst to me, at the end of the case, and I write about it in the book, I was kind of unraveled emotionally and psychologically. I went a little too far at times, and I write about it in the book. But as long as you try to set something up to mitigate that stress and mitigate that trauma, I do a lot about talking about like that now, breath work and not just taking a ring off, but looking back, there's some other things I could have done to mitigate it. But
well, so let's talk about that. You write about the psychological struggles of living a double life. What were some beyond the pinky ring strategy? What were some of the coping mechanisms you developed during your time undercover? What do you still use today? I'm wondering if there's anything that people listening to this can use in their own lives.
Sure. In the personal and the private sector and the corporate world, and I even talk about it in law enforcement. The best technique, the best tool I ever had in my toolbox was breath work. And now, I'm talking about box breathing type of breath work being mindfulness. But I was doing it, I would say I started investigating it in the 90s, long before it was popular. And now I was trying that. And that really was. And what sent me down that road, Frank, was during my trainings, we have ticks and tells. Everybody has a tick and a tell. So imagine you're not in the mafia. That's a little too extreme, but you're in a boardroom and you're a corporate employee and maybe you're doing an acquisition or a merger with another corporation. And you don't want to show, it's like playing poker. You don't want to show your cards. Well, somebody like me, when I come in the room, I look for your tick and your tell, whatever your twitch is, whatever your nerve, when you get that 220 heartbeats a minute and your cortisol is pumping through your body, that's when your tick starts. Maybe your tick is just tapping your finger on your leg. Maybe it's biting you. For me, I used to bite my jaw. My jaw protruded, the muscle in my jaw. That was my tick and my tell. So how do I control that? Well, and how do I control my emotions when I do have to go back in the house and now become a dad or become a husband and deal with the everyday relationships that I chose to live in my real world, my real life. So breath work is everything. Box breathing would deregulate. When I was deregulated, it would heart rate variability, heart rate HRV. That's bringing your heart rate down to where you're so calm that you're almost like at a snail's pace. You want to bring your heart rate down in. And I found it to be very effective in both my real life and my undercover life. Because when I was doing box breathing during operations, I'd have cartel members when we left and they'd be on a Title III, a wiretap. They would say, listen, I don't like that guy, Giovanni. I don't like him. He's a killer. He's stone cold. And it was all because I was doing breath work and I was so calm. I wasn't nervous. My speech pattern didn't change. I was very fluid in the way I spoke. I wasn't a nervous wreck, stuttering my words and grasping at words. So it changed everything. So once you were able to control that heart rate, now I can have a corporate conversation. I can have a conversation with my loved one, my spouse, without arguing and screaming, right? Having a domestic dispute versus having a calm, rational discussion. And HRV and understanding that and box breathing was my tool. That was my samurai sword every time I did an operation. I knew if I can control my emotions and my breathing, I'll make it through anything.
Wow. Obviously the mob world, the criminal world, the law enforcement world, it's a world where anything can happen. What was the most surprising or unexpected event that occurred during your time infiltrating the DeCavalcanti family?
There were so many of them, Frank. I mean, those on the edge of your seat where people would go, oh my God, how did you survive that? And for me, it was like, I've been through that a bunch of times, a malfunction with equipment I had one night. And one of the guys being Charlie's son, eventually what happened was Charlie had put his son under me. If you can imagine that, if anybody understands the mafia world, he took his own son and his son reported to me every day. So I had that harrowing, you can only imagine. I have this capo that I'm trying to please, and now I'm worried if his son looks at me in a side eye, because who am I to come in and take his father's love and his father's attention? That always weighed on me. But then one night in particular, I couldn't get one of my devices to work, and we had a real small battery with these two little prongs, and I couldn't get the prongs in the holes. And as I'm pulling it, and I'm holding it up to my dome light in my truck, and I'm trying to get it plugged in, and he came walking up alongside the car and just ripped the door open and screamed, just as a joke, screamed, "Give me all your money." And I took the device and I shoved it under the seat between my legs, and he quickly went, whoa, 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 gee, it's me. Don't shoot. So he walked up so fast, he didn't see that I had a device in my hand. He just thought I was reaching under my seat for a gun because I thought I was being robbed. So that was only one harrowing aspect of it, or things that went horribly wrong. So many of them. And just, saying the wrong thing, walking into a situation. I was around 19 guys in Vegas, and this one guy was drunk and belligerent. And as soon as he met me, and my capo introduced me, and they were all made guys from different families, and they were all bosses. And the one guy just started snapping his fingers at me, drunk. And he looked at me and says, I know you. And again, control your heart rate on that. And he's pointing in my face. Drunk, and he goes, I know you. Where do I know you from? And now you have everybody's attention. 20 guys are standing there, including my capo now. And he's, where do you know each other from? So again, I mitigated, and he was like, you don't know me. And he says, yeah, I know you. Did we do time at Lewisburg? I think I did time with you. What's your name? And he just peppered me and wouldn't let it go because he was drunk. But again, I had to show my part. And the way I mitigated that was telling Charlie later on, hey, what's with this guy? He's really being a pain in my neck. I'm going to have to straighten this guy out if he doesn't leave me alone. And then again, for evidence purposes, he goes, oh, relax. You can't. He's a made guy. You can't touch him. Giovanni, you're not allowed to touch made guys. So he would school me in these things. I didn't come in thinking I knew everything about the mafia just because I did. I knew everything about the mob, but I had to play stupid.
Right.
And that was an education because, again, my investigative brain was I had to have these conversations because I'm creating evidence. I'm building evidence and tapes against these guys. So I have to be very critical on what conversations I can and cannot have, because if I go too far, now I look like, why are you asking so many questions? Are you a rat? Not that you're a cop. They would never think I was a cop. They would think I was a rat, then they would do away with me. And I've seen guys killed for much less, wow. In the history of the mafia and things I've investigated over my career. So yeah, it's a slippery slope.
Talk to me about mafia culture and pop cultural depictions versus reality. We talked about The Sopranos. We talked about Donnie Brasco. But given your deep infiltration into the DeCavalcanti family, how does the public's sometimes romanticized view of the mafia differ from the reality that you witnessed?
Sure. I mean, you're seeing from the film aspect, you're seeing the guy's story of his criminal life, his personal life, and he's the main character of a film. So of course, they build that story up and they build that character up and they show empathy for him and they show sympathy for him or her as the main character of the story of a movie. It's not always like that on film, it's not like that in real life, excuse me. but it can often be much different, you know. Yeah, sometimes we love a movie where the bad guy wins, and it's a bit of a change. But in the end, it's a lot of these guys, they get what they deserve at the end, and they signed up knowing that. So some people I've met along the way, they have lived their life in Cosa Nostra as if they think they're in a movie. Mm-hmm. And you have to kind of straighten it out and share your experience and share your thoughts and go, what's with this guy? Why is he got to be so over the top? Why does he have to be so flaunting it? Why, I was taught by my guy to be omerta, be quiet, be a piece of sand on the beach. They're beautiful quotes my capo used to say to me, Giovanni, be a piece of sand on the beach. So then when I had the ability to say, hey, how come that guy's not like a piece of sand on the beach? That's right, my boy. You're listening to me. I'm teaching you. See what's happening here? You're learning. Don't be like that guy. That guy's an idiot. He's going to wind up dead. And then you'd be in a meeting for a bowl of macaroni, and then somebody from another Borgata, being a Gambino, said to me one day, yeah, listen, I've been on the delivering end of a message, and I don't want to be on that end. I ended people's lives before, and hopefully we conduct ourselves in the street and we go home and, we don't get too behind the ear. I don't know what it's like, and I don't know what it feels like, but I know what it sounds like, and I know what it looks like. I don't want that to ever happen to me. So they plant these seeds. You don't see that part in the movies. You just see the murder and mayhem, and it's for drama, but you don't see what goes on behind the scenes. The fact that they can just do away, and ultimately that's what happened in my case. I had the task of killing somebody that was born and raised around these guys. When I tell you he committed his life to Cosa Nostra, and all he did was, since a little kid, was want to be a made guy. And then at the end, they turned on him and had me plan a murder of him. You don't see that side. Sometimes you do, but it's not portrayed in the films like you see in real life.
You mentioned the fact that your family had to relocate, and after your undercover career ended, you were relocated. How did you and your family adjust to a sudden change like this, and what challenges did you face in reintegrating into society?
Oh, sure. It was. I think that, Frank, that still goes on today. The toll that it's taken on me and my family, the regret that I have, and put my family through that, I can never make it up to them. They lived in a forever home, as people call it. The house where they were going to be born and raised, and you have your roots. And that's the way I grew up too, having your roots in a community. And I had that back home in New Jersey. And then one day it was just, we're here. And the next day it's tell your little kids you're on vacation, and we're going on a really long vacation because they're just too young to understand. And then as time went on, kids in law enforcement they're very smart, they're very keen, they're very observant. We think we hide things from them, but they're smarter than we give them credit for. And they kind of figured that out on their own. And as the conversations they heard, eventually when they came to understand that we were relocated, they would ask me questions like, are we okay? Is somebody still looking for you? And you don't want to put that trauma on your kids, but you have to be honest with them too at the same time. So it has taken a great toll. As far as putting my life back together, my life will never be what it was in 2014, 2015. It just won't be. My true name isn't Giovanni Rocco, and I have to live under assumed names, and I have to live in, relocated places and undisclosed locations, and that'll never change. I don't know how long that goes. Look at Joe Pistone and Jack Garcia. Mm-hmm. It's how many decades later, and they're still living this life. So I don't know what the answer to that is as far as how long it goes, but the pain, it's like an open wound that doesn't heal, I guess. That's really how I can describe it.
Lastly, Giovanni, what's the mafia like today, based on your understanding of it? You very rarely hear about gangland killings, which were commonplace a couple of decades ago. You don't really hear about mafia domination of certain industries being ubiquitous as it was a couple of decades ago. What's your understanding about how powerful and how pervasive La Cosa Nostra is in this day and age?
They are still around. They're still prevalent. They're still as strong as they once were. They might not be as strong as they were in the 70s and 80s, but they are strong. And they are quiet right now, and they are on the ground. They do a lot with even crypto. They have to change their ways just like we do. As society advances, they advance. And they're trying to learn their ways right now. But from a law enforcement perspective, I encourage law enforcement, please do not lose sight of these guys. Just because counterterrorism is a thing today, and just because events happen, please don't lose sight of these guys, because the minute you take the eye off the ball, they're going to run loose on you. And they're doing that now. And there's a recipe for disaster I often talk about. And I think what's going on in the world politically and how we live our life and how the economy is going right now, you have to remember, rewind to when I was a kid or you were a kid. You know, this is prime time. You know, in the 70s, they thrived because everybody was, they were on hard times financially. You know, everybody was in debt. Nobody could afford their way of living. Everything was too expensive. It reminds you a lot of that era. So it is just a matter of time before you find some really capable guys that are willing to step up, and I think they will reorganize. It might not be traditional organized crime. It might be a Eurasian group. As you see right now, it's the cartels right now in Mexico that are the strongest, and they're calling the shots right now. But as those groups come here and they spill over into our communities, you will see that. There will be a new defined organized crime establishment, and it might not be traditional Italian, but it might be another group, another race, but it will be.
My guest has been Giovanni Rocco. I want to encourage everybody to check out his book, Giovanni's Ring, My Life Inside the Real Sopranos. If you want to check it out, you can just go to the website, giovannisring.com. You can learn more about Giovanni and what he's doing. It's also available on Amazon and wherever books are sold. Giovanni, thank you. I hope we could do this again in the future.
Frank, thank you for the opportunity. Great talking to you.
If you want to comment on any portion of our discussion, you're welcome to give me an email. My email is frank.morano@wabcradio.com. That's frank.morano at wabcradio.com. If someone sent you this podcast, do us a favor and return the favor by sending it to a friend. And if you just stumbled upon this podcast, do us a favor and subscribe to The Racket Report. It's available on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever podcasts are available. Just search The Racket Report and hit the subscribe button. Until we meet again in cyberspace, I'll see you on the radio.
Everything from clothing to household items are getting more expensive each day. American Giant is about keeping things simple and close to home. They aren't affected by tariffs because their products never leave the U.S. Support American-made tariff-free clothing with American Giant with American Giant. Get 20% off your first order when you use promo code STAPLE20 at american-giant.com. That's 20% off when you use code STAPLE20 at american-giant.com.